everybody. Welcome back to the Covenant Eyes podcast. Karen Potter here, and I am really excited about today's interview because we have a longtime friend of Covenant Eyes joining us, Rob Stoddard. Who do we have coming on the program today? This is exciting.
We are excited about today. So our guest today is Dallas Jenkins. He's a writer, producer, director, and of course, you know him from the Chosen series. I believe you co-wrote that and also directing that. And so, Dallas, welcome to the Covenant Eyes podcast.
Thank you so much. This is actually an honor for me because as she mentioned, I've been a Covenant Eyes fan, evangelist, user for a very long time before you guys were cool. I was using Covenant Eyes to in many ways not save my marriage per se, but I mean it really saved my soul in a lot of ways. So I'm thrilled to talk to you guys.
Excellent. Well, can we start out just asking you to give us a little bit of background of your story, and then also how you got to the point where you're at now with the Chosen?
Yeah. So years ago, I mean, here's where I'll tell my Covenant Eyes story first. But when the internet first was created, I mean, when it first became popular, I was in college, and I was someone who, for most of my life, I'd lived in a pretty sheltered environment in a good way. There's nothing to complain about. But I was protected from pornography. I just didn't have much access to it. And as someone who was motivated by affirmation and preventing embarrassment, like I was someone who I think most of my life, and I'll get to this later in this story because it's in many ways the story of the Chosen, but words of affirmation were important to me. Performing was important to me. The love of self, that was just something that I think motivated me. I loved getting affirmed. I loved getting attention, and that motivated me in many ways. And I think I'm sure you guys have seen this, that if Covenant Eyes has ever done a study on the types of people that are more prone to pornography, I've seen over the years a pattern that people who, it's not just people who maybe are more lustful, but it's people who I think are motivated in many ways. I think narcissism is a common trait. And maybe I don't know exactly why, but there's kind of this, not just the obvious self-pleasure, but also just self-affirmation is motivating for a lot of people. And that was me. I just didn't have access to pornography. And then I remember in college, the first time I discovered, and I was at a Christian college. I was working for a teacher. I was like a teacher's assistant. I was in his office and I'm like browsing the internet and I'm realizing, oh my goodness, there is you can go down this path that's unending and no one knows. I can do this privately and no one is like, unlike walking into an adult bookstore where people will see you. And that was always, motivating for me to avoid, or going to the Blockbuster video store. And what I used to do occasionally if I did struggle was I'd rent 8 videos and one of them would be inappropriate because I didn't want it to be focused on, So when I discovered, it was immediately like, I remember the first time I spent like 5 hours just unending looking at pornography on the internet. Now, fast forward to years later, I wasn't at the level that I've seen others get to. It wasn't a daily obsession and addiction for me, but it was something that when I had the opportunity and when it was on my mind, I struggled with it. And I eventually got caught, and it was very damaging to my wife, of course, who had never seen or understood how this could be something that I could struggle with, or that a spouse could struggle with while still loving their wife and still loving God. I mean, for her, it was kind of an all or nothing thing. It was like, how could you love me and how could we have a healthy sex life? And yet, I guess I'm finding out that we don't, in fact, love each other like I thought you did. And our sex life must not be healthy if you are, having the struggle elsewhere. So all of this was just completely a shock to the system. And Covenant Eyes was the thing at the time that I don't remember how I discovered it, honestly. I don't remember if someone recommended it to me, but it was this, if everything you're doing is someone you trust and love is also going to see what you're doing. That's as close as it gets to knowing that God is watching what you're doing. And I was someone who I'm ashamed to say this, But knowing that God was watching wasn't enough motivation for me to not do it, because he wasn't physically there in front of me. And I could kind of come up with excuses, and I could come up with ways to kind of shut that out of my mind, and my flesh would take over. But knowing that someone in my life was going to see it became such a great motivator for me. Now, I wish I could say that was all I needed. And I wish I could also say that that I didn't need that, because I think someone could easily say, look, you should be motivated enough by the Holy Spirit. And if you need someone watching you all the time, well, then your heart truly hasn't changed. And I think to some extent that's true. I just know that the Gospels say, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out. It doesn't say, if your right hand causes you to sin, you need to pray more and you need to rely on the Holy Spirit. So I know this is a long answer to your question, but it instantly made such a huge difference. And a weight was lifted from me. I was just like, oh, it actually makes me feel more free. I came up with this analogy that it may not be a perfect analogy, but I describe it to people who say, artistically, or when it comes to overcoming sin, they're like, all these guardrails, that's not true freedom. And I'm like, in many ways, guardrails can make you feel even more free. And I came up with this analogy of like a block of ice out in the middle of the ocean. And there's sharks all around this block of ice. And you want to go figure skating. And I'm like, if there's no wall on the block of ice, you're actually limited in how free you can feel to do all these twists and turns and really cool moves, because you know that if you fall, you're going to go into the ocean, slide off the edge of the block of ice, and you're going to be eaten by sharks. So in many ways, having the fence around you, around the block of ice, makes you feel even more willing to take chances and to do flips, and you actually feel more free with the guardrails. And that's what I felt with Covenant Eyes. I felt like I could be on the internet and know that like my heart wasn't at risk of stepping outside of what God's will for me was, because I was like, if I do this, I'm gonna fall. Or if I'm tempted to try something inappropriate, I'm gonna be prevented by this wall. And now I can feel free to just to be less. I don't know, be less fearful. I used to sometimes get online and go, all right, Dallas, don't get tempted. Don't get tempted. Focus on sports. Focus on your work. Don't get tempted. And it was just so easy for me to fall back into it. So Covenant Eyes really gave me these guardrails that allowed me to actually feel more free. Now, I'm not going to take up the entire podcast to talk about this, but how that also led to The Chosen was when I had a big career failure in my career, God introduced this principle to me that I just hadn't had before. He'd probably said it, but I hadn't, let it invade my life, which is, it's not your job to feed the 5,000. It's only to provide the loaves and fish. And that principle of focus on the loaves and fish that you give to God, focus on making those worthy of acceptance from him. And that once he deems your gift worthy of acceptance, and by that I mean it's healthy, it's good, it's pleasing to the Lord, the transaction is over. The results of what he does with it are not up to you. And that shifted my focus from being someone who needed affirmation, because I had a relapse. I had a relapse in my struggle shortly before The Chosen came along. As anyone can do, sometimes you can find a workaround, not around Covenant Eyes per se, but you can maybe get on a computer that doesn't have it, or you can be on Facebook and Facebook Messenger, and you can be having conversations that aren't necessarily going to trigger the Covenant Eyes algorithm. I don't want to be giving people ideas, but I'm saying there's always things that if you truly are going to, if your heart hasn't changed at all, and Covenant Eyes can only do so much. And I think you guys say this, Covenant Eyes is a tool to get you into a right relationship with God. It's not the end game. And so I had a relapse, and it devastated my marriage again. And I was like, all right, I can't do this again. I have to, gouging out my eye isn't enough. I have to really get at the root of it. And the root of it was narcissism for me, and focusing on results and affirmation. And so that ultimately led to, in my career, failing and going, all right, I've got to focus on pleasing God and being in God's will, not on the results. And that ultimately is where God said, all right, now you're ready for The Chosen. And so the journey, a combination of Covenant Eyes along with this biblical principle that God gave me through a stranger really ultimately changed my life and changed my heart. And and I'm a different person than I was. So that's a very long answer to your question. But it's true.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That was an incredible story and testimony. And we're so grateful that you felt comfortable sharing that with us. I think you brought up so many good things and things that we hear from our members all the time, which is, a lot of folks that are struggling with pornography do have kind of a performance,
Yeah.
kind of like mindset. They're achievers. They want the best. And sometimes then when we don't achieve that or we have a failure or a setback, that can really harm us. And that triggers the old behaviors, the old habits. And so you really experience so many things that so many of our members go through and this is beautiful that you're sharing that. And I love the loving guardrails. I think the Bible is full of guardrails for us, and it's not to confine us or constrict us, but it's to give us freedom, like you said. And I just think that was really incredible. So I'm just taken back by your story, and thank you for sharing that. What are some of I guess, the ways that you're integrating accountability in other areas of your walk? Is this a principle that applies not just to, your online behavior, but is this a principle that you've used in other areas?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it applies to my whole family, and then even what I usually recommend to people, and I'll use Covenant Eyes as an example, because Covenant Eyes isn't designed to help you with your your fitness, for example. But the principles of it, I do think apply to getting your heart right. And so for me, I'm a big health and fitness guy. I believe that God cares about our hearts, our minds, and our bodies. And I think that oftentimes when you're in good habits in one area, it kind of exercises that discipline muscle in other areas. And so I've just found that when it comes to your quiet time, when it comes to your health and fitness, when it comes to your relationships with others, when it comes to my marriage, I have lots of things that fall under the category of accountability or fall under the category of habits that Covenant Eyes applies to as well. So, my kids, all of my kids, my wife, my wife doesn't really need it, but on our computer, we all have Covenant Eyes, and it's this principle of accountability. And the principle of accountability, we are meant to be in relationship. God gives us people, and throughout Scripture, you talk about, you see how often God puts someone in someone's life, either as a mentor or as a friend, to again remind them of those guardrails and to confront them when they step out of it. I told you before we got on the air, I said I actually have a pretty funny Covenant Eye story, because this concept of accountability, you have to check it, and you have to get into good habits, and you have to practice this regularly. I have reminders on my phone to remind me to love my wife better, to say a kind word, to pour into my employees, to be grateful, to love like Christ loves. I have Bible verses that pop up once a week on my phone. And so even just getting every other week, getting that email about my kids and their habits online, and knowing that my friends get the email showing them my habits online, it's just good habit forming. Well, my wife, every time she puts Covenant Eyes on a new computer, she tests it. She wants to know that it's going to work. And so I don't know how I didn't know at the time how she does it, but I remember I get an email from one of my accountability partners who just forwards me my report that they had gotten, and just says, "Hey, how you doing with your purity, man?" And then at the same time, I get a text from my other accountability partner. He's like, "Hey, you doing okay with the porn struggle?" And I'm all at the same time, and I hadn't heard from them in 2 years. So I'm like, "What's going on?" And I look at the report, and there's a search, like a Google search for boobs, literally just the word boobs. And I'm like, I didn't do that. What is this? And I'm like going, who, like, I'm like, guys, I promise. And I was even laughing. I'm like, guys, do you really think that I would like go online and just have such a weird, just out of the blue struggle where I'm just going to type in boobs? It's just such a like dehumanizing, like weird, like I'm just so desperate right now. I'm just going to look for boobs. It was just so weird. I'm like, I think you can understand that wouldn't be me. I come to find out it was my wife, Amanda, who's just testing Covenant Eyes. And she just literally had just done a Google search for boobs to see what would come up. And I'm like, all right, Amanda, can you give me a heads up next time so that my accountability partners aren't sitting there going like, all right, Dallas is so off the rails. He's turned into a 14-year-old boy who has, no nuance or anything. He's just boobs. And so now we all know that's the trigger for Amanda just downloaded it onto someone else's computer and is checking to make sure. But that leaving the humor of that aside, the concept of, having accountability, checking your guardrails, forming new habits has applied to my whole life, not just specifically the porn struggle.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's funny too. We've heard some good ones, but that's right up there.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, to segue a little bit, people that are struggling, obviously the social media content today, the entertainment industry today is a landmine for people who struggle with these kinds of things, or, it's going to lead them into these kinds of things. That's why it's so, I think, critical and important that we have these alternative entertainment venues or outlets. And so I love the positive Christian message that you're doing and the work you're doing. From your work with The Chosen and some of the other things that you've done, are you finding that the success with that is going to begin to open, or maybe already is opening up doors to more of this kind of, entertainment and this material? Because I think overall that really is going to help people, especially with this issue.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's two aspects of it I want to address real quick. One is, as I'm sure you guys encourage your users to understand, it's not enough just to prevent bad things from coming onto your computer or coming into your life. You have to replace them with good things.
Absolutely.
There's an amazing book, and I encourage people to read it. It's not a Christian book per se, but it's called The Power of Habit. And The Power of Habit is an extraordinary book. It's on my Mount Rushmore of books that I give to people, and especially people who are struggling with anything. Any addiction, because most things aren't, and I'm sure you guys know this, most struggles with pornography or obesity or anything aren't literal addictions by the official psychological definition of it. Most of it, there are some people who have addictions, some people who have chemical imbalances, but 90% of it, you guys would know these stats better than I do, but the majority of it is habits. It's poor habits that may be spurred on by something in your childhood, may be spurred on by some of your proclivities in your DNA. But for the most part, it's you at some point along the way developed a habit. And what the Power of Habit talks about is cue, response, reward. And so what happens with pornography is we're cued by something, whether it's lust or seeing someone in public or something popping up on your computer or, nighttime for a lot of guys. It's just nighttime comes and the demons come out and we just go, we're alone. All these things can cue this desire for something that's going to give us a certain amount of pleasure, dopamine hit or whatever it is. So then what's your response to that? And then your reward is whether it's the dopamine hit or the pleasure or whatever, you need to replace at least one of those three things to create a new habit. And so The Chosen is in many ways my desire to replace in people's lives the entertainment factor, because so often we're entertained by the best creators, the most creative people in the world tend to come from Hollywood with their message, their dopamine hits that they want to provide you, and they are not godly. They are not biblical. I'm talking about the projects. And so The Chosen can be, and hopefully, like you said, lead to other projects like this. And we're in the rooms right now and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, the top leaders of the top entertainment companies in the entire world who are wanting to do and help finance and help produce, without changing the content, more of what we're doing, more biblical content, more Christ-like content. And it's a pretty extraordinary opportunity. But that is, I believe, the way to help change these habits that we and our kids have gotten into. And I'm telling you, and you guys know this as well as anyone, it is unbelievable what parents have to deal with now. The fight that we are having for our kids' hearts and minds, yes, and the addictions in some ways and this is especially true of my daughters, because as we know, women struggle less with pornography than men do. Now, of course, there's exceptions, but by and large, women are going to struggle, maybe not with sexual pornography, but emotional pornography. My daughters are struggling with things like acceptance and looks. And when they do posts that they're going to get more likes based on this kind of post. And they're seeing TikTok and Instagram constantly, people providing what the world's view of success and beauty and what being liked is and what being desired is and how to compete with other girls for attention. I mean, it is insidious, and there is a limit to what Covenant Eyes can do in that regard. And so hopefully, and what we've seen this happen, and it's beautiful. The Chosen is replacing, for many people, the entertainment that they're normally going to consume and giving them a new heart for something that is good as opposed to evil, that is affirming as opposed to damaging. And that is one of the main reasons I do The Chosen. And it's to give, Generation Z, much less adults, something that they can replace for the attention of their hearts and minds. And it's not enough just to say, guys, that's all bad. Don't do it. Well, what is gonna entertain? What is gonna uplift? What is gonna feed that dopamine hit that they're normally used to getting? Because we do need that, and hopefully the Holy Spirit can give some of that. But it's not going to just happen only from Bible reading. Most people, I think, if we're honest with ourselves, are not going to just read the Bible all day long in between our meals. There are things that are going to satisfy some of the God-given urges we have, and hopefully we can satisfy it with the good. And much like healthy sex with your spouse can help replace some of your urges that you have that could be damaging. Hopefully, The Chosen and other projects like it can help replace some of these urges we have for entertainment that might not feed the soul but feeds the flesh.
That is so good. I love that you brought up the kids, because really our kids are being attacked in some brutal ways by technology companies that, I mean, if we're being honest, they just don't care about the well-being of our children, both in their mental health capacity or just the exposure to pornography. And we know that earlier and earlier exposure to pornography has detrimental effects on children's developmental behavior. So I'm glad you brought that up. And one of the things that I love about The Chosen and also about what Angel Studios is doing is really providing that outlet, like you mentioned, for clean, wholesome entertainment, because you are absolutely right. One thing that we find at Covenant Eyes is that when people quit using pornography, if they don't supplement that with good behavior or good habits, then they can find themselves right back into the loop, because we can't just stop doing something and not fill it with something positive and healthy. And yes, we can't just read it. I mean, we could, but most of us won't read our Bible all day long. So what can we fill those spaces with? And I think your work with The Chosen is one of those really good pieces of content that can help us during those times. Can you talk to us a little bit about, I mean, you're kind of the counterculture to what Hollywood is doing, but can you talk to us a little bit about what more we need to do as Christians to really take back entertainment, music, movies, TV, all of it, because it's all been pornified. And I think it's really detrimental.
Yeah, I think that whether you are a viewer, a consumer of content, I think that, again, it's easy for people to just look at pornography as the bad. And if we can prevent pornography, then we're okay. And I think you guys would be the first to say, look, we're a tool, and look, we're addressing, and we can help with the worst elements of this, but we can't stop everything. And also, Covenant Eyes isn't going to flag, I'm going to give an example. Like one of my daughters was struggling again with her self-image. And so she's obsessed with like hair and makeup websites and stuff. And she's obsessed with physical appearance well, Covenant Eyes isn't going to red flag, a visit to a makeup site. So as parents, if you're a consumer, you have to be watching what your kids are doing and be engaged in that conversation, so that you might have a kid who doesn't struggle with pornography in the purest sense of the word, but they're struggling with self-esteem and self-worth. And so if you're a consumer, I think you've got to not only be avoiding the bad, but looking for the good, and don't require organizations to just find you. you've got to make yourself available, and you got to start looking for this kind of stuff. And that includes asking friends, what are your kids watching that they really like, that you actually have seen that you're in favor of, because I need more. And even you go to like certain streaming platforms that are family friendly. And now that's changing. Their values are changing, and you can't rely on that anymore. And so you've got to be aggressive. You got to be an informed consumer. And then if you're a creator, if you're someone who wants to be creating good content, I think this also is true. It's not enough just to do good stuff for the soul. You've got to be good at it. You've got to really, and you guys experience this. Your technology has to be good. If you're going to compete with others' technology, it's not enough to just go use our technology and we're going to help you with pornography. Well, if the app doesn't work, and it's clunky, or it slows down your phone, and now you're like, well, okay, these preventative measures that Covenant Eyes is helping me with actually make my life more challenging. And so you guys have to compete with some of these apps and the technology that the world is so great at. The same is true when it comes to creating positive content, is you've got to be as good or better when it comes to the technology, the production value, the storytelling, the entertainment value, has got to be as good, because otherwise your kids especially are going to be like, how come it feels like homework every time I have to watch something that's faith-based? It feels like I'm in a church study, and eventually that's not sustainable. So you've got to be able to, if you're going to compete for the hearts and minds of people, you have to sometimes make sure that the quality level is there too. So again, be an informed consumer who's looking for the good, not just rejecting the bad. And then also, if you're a creator, make sure that you're getting good at your job. That for me, the loaves and fish that I do provide to God, the 5 loaves and 2 fish, that they're as healthy and good as they can be, so that if they are multiplied, they can feed 5,000.
Yeah, that's excellent. And your content is to that level. It's amazing.
Yes.
And it's so great to watch. Hey, as we start to wrap up, Dallas, we do want to give our fans a little scoop here. So tell us a little bit about season 4. I know you can't give any spoilers, but is this the last season of Chosen, or are there more coming up? And then also just any other works that you have got in the works that you can tell us about?
Yeah. So, of course, season 4 is not the final season. There's going to be 7 seasons of The Chosen.
Wow.
Yeah, we're going to be covering the crucifixion in season 6. Spoiler alert: Jesus does die. I hope that's not too much of a spoiler for your audience. And then, but the good news is, another spoiler alert: he does come back, and that's in season 7. So we've got a lot of stories still to cover. Season 4 is out right now. At the time of our conversation, it's in theaters, and then it's going to be available on streaming in the Chosen app, where you can find it. You can just look for the Chosen app and find that content. And right now we're about to film season 5. So I'm putting the finishing touches on the scripts. We're going to be filming season 5, and we've got then 2 more seasons after that. So if you haven't seen The Chosen yet, you can find it on the Chosen app. You can look on Netflix and PureFlix and Amazon and Peacock. We're very easy to find. It won't always be that case. Sometimes, eventually, there might be fewer places to find it. But if you look for it, you'll be able to find it. And then I just actually finished filming a movie called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. It's based on a popular book and play that's over 30 years old that I absolutely loved. I've been chasing it it's almost 50 years old. But it's an extraordinary story. And I'd been chasing the rights and been told no for years and years. And I finally got the right to do it. So I filmed it this past holiday season. It's going to be coming out at the end of 2024. So yeah, the content train keeps coming. We want to be doing this for a long time. My bio on my Instagram and Facebook pages, it just says, I tell Jesus stories. That's what I feel called to do. And whether it's something directly from the Gospels, or it's a story like The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, or another Bible project that I may do, it all points to Jesus. And that's my job, is to tell Jesus stories. And so, hopefully that continues for a long time and gives your viewers something or your users something to find in place of the thing that they're trying to prevent.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. And I know that our members are going to be super excited. And right now, Chosen season 4 is in theaters, but it will be streaming in March. Is that correct?
Yeah, the dates we're working on, again, I'm not sure. I don't know exactly when our conversation will be posted, but very soon. We're working on the exact dates right now where it will be available to stream free and easy.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, one last question for you. I feel like there are a lot of people, Christian and non-Christian, that are tuning into The Chosen. So, talk to me a little bit about what it's like to be using this kind of almost as a ministry, kind of an outreach, and you're reaching people that would otherwise never set their foot inside of a church building. So, what's that like and how does that feel?
Yeah. So I always tell people I don't put onto my cast and crew my own personal mission. We have lots of cast and crew who aren't believers. We have lots of cast and crew who come from different faith, political, uh, cultural backgrounds. And I mean, there's even been some controversy with that from some viewers who would be more comfortable if our set was almost like a church and ministry set, where everyone was a believer and everyone kind of followed certain standards of their dress and their behavior and their what they post on social media. And that is not that. I do not imprint upon them my own personal ministry. So we actually say frequently, The Chosen is not a ministry in the purest definition of the term. We're not a nonprofit. And so now, then people sometimes get glitched by that and they go, wait a minute, Chosen is a huge ministry. And wait, I thought you were doing this to impact people. The answer is, of course, yes. My personal ministry, I'm saying, is not necessarily imprinted upon my cast and crew. That said, The Chosen all over the world, in every country and in dozens of languages, has been used successfully as a tool to bring people closer to Christ, to turn many people from death to life, to introduce Christians who have been Christians for a long time. I mean, I hear from 80-year-olds who will tell me, I am understanding the Bible more and reading my Bible more than ever because of The Chosen. Um, at least a third of the people that I meet in public who recognize me will come up and just start crying. And it's not a celebrity thing. It's I want to say thank you thing. So it is the joy of my life to see people all over the world impacted and changed by The Chosen. And the fact that a TV show can be used as a ministry tool, as an evangelism tool. I would just encourage you, if you are using it that way, if you are encouraging people to see it, to not be discouraged if A, they don't want to watch it, or B, they watch it and they don't come to Christ because of it. It's okay. That's God's job. It's not our job to feed the 5,000. It's our job to provide the loaves and fish. And when you give 5 loaves and 2 fish, like the boy did in the story, he didn't do it thinking, all right, good, I'm giving 5 loaves and 2 fish because now 5,000 people are going to be fed. He didn't do it with the result in mind. He obeyed because he was asked. And so we are called to introduce people to an authentic Jesus. What happens as a result of that is not up to us. So don't feel the pressure to see the results of your evangelism. Just feel the pressure to evangelize, because that is what God wants. And The Chosen has proven to be, and I'm saying this not arrogantly, I'm saying this objectively. It has proven to be an extraordinarily effective tool in the toolbox for those of us who are trying to introduce people to Jesus. And it's the show is not the end game, but it can be the entry point. And so feel free to just introduce people to it the same way you do introduce other shows. Oh my gosh, have you watched Breaking Bad? It's one of my favorite shows of all time. And you got to watch it. Maybe the first episode you might not love, but trust me, it's, whatever it is you need to say that you normally say, you can say about The Chosen, and not feel the pressure to change the world just from getting people to watch it. And so I think that's an important thing to remember.
Well, excellent. That is just right on words. But just know, God bless this work, and God is using you and using this show. And we're so excited to talk with you today and hear this. And I could sit and talk with you for hours. I can tell you're just this down to earth guy, but full of love for the Lord, and that just comes out. So thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for joining us today. And we'll definitely get all of those links in our show notes for anybody who might not happen to know what The Chosen is. But I guess, Karen, you want to wrap us up today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dallas, it has been a joy to have you on. And thank you also for being a supporter of Covenant Eyes and helping us share the message about overcoming pornography. It is possible. And I'm so grateful for you sharing your own personal testimony. And I hope many lives are blessed because of that. We are not alone in this journey and this battle. And we are just so grateful for your time today. In closing, do you want to close with any final words to our audience as we wrap up today's session?
I mean, I think we covered a lot of it. I desperately hope people will use Covenant Eyes, use it well to its fullest extent, while recognizing that Covenant Eyes isn't everything. It's not, and I think you guys are comfortable with me saying that.
Yes.
It doesn't solve the heart problem. It can just be a tremendous tool, but use it, spread the word about it. It is extraordinary. I have been an evangelist for it for at least 15 years. I don't, it might be longer. I mean, from almost the time you guys were founded, I've been using it, and it's been very effective, and it's used in my family, and I've recommended it to lots of people who've said to me, "Oh my gosh, thank you. It's impacted my life." The Chosen is similar. It's not the end game. It's not everything. It is not a replacement for the Bible, just like Covenant Eyes isn't a replacement for the Holy Spirit's work, but it is a tool that can be used to bring you closer to Christ. And so I do hope that you'll check out both those things and look them up. I'm assuming that if you're listening to this podcast, you are a Covenant Eyes user, or maybe you're here because you know the Chosen, but you didn't know Covenant Eyes, and you heard about it, and you heard I'm on, so you wanted to listen. I'm telling you, both of these things are technology and entertainment and media tools in a sight and sound age that can be used to bring you closer to Christ. And I hope you'll pursue them.
Absolutely. An amazing way to close today's episode. Well, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the Covenant Eyes podcast. Take care. God bless. And we'll see you next time.